Okay, so welcome everybody, and we have a very special guest today, Dimitri Khalezov. He is a ex-Soviet whistleblower. So we are in for a very special treat today. Can we first, I would like to do this interview a little bit differently. Rather than starting off with who you are and what you want to tell us, I think best is first you tell us what you want to tell us, and then later you can tell us how you're qualified to make these statements. So
Good
if you
morning.
don't mind, good morning. So if you don't mind, let me first start with the big question. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay.
But
So
I
the
just
big
would like to
question.
apologize for my English because English is not my native language, so that is the way I speak.
Yes, but I can understand you just fine, and I'm
Okay.
sure everybody else. So the big question on everybody's mind is if America faked the moon landings, why didn't the Soviet Union blow the whistle on it?
It is very difficult to be exact, but my own opinion is that actually I mean, because you know that Russia and America were bitter enemies during the so-called Cold War. And they were really enemies. They even waged the war by proxy, like in Korea, in Vietnam, and elsewhere. And it is really strange that that the Soviet Union would not, how to say, unmask the American moon landing program publicly, and in doing so humiliate their bitter enemy. It's really strange, and people prefer not to answer this question. So for me, it was. Actually, there could be two things. One thing is of less important is that the Soviet Union was controlled by Freemasons in one way or another since at least the death of Joseph Stalin. And because the moon landing is a Freemasonic project, and the Freemasons control both countries, United States and Russia, they would probably not allow the Soviet leadership to touch the project. That is, you can compare it with the 9/11 project. You see that Russia is even worse enemy of America today, because Americans supply mortal weapons that is used in Ukraine to kill Russian soldiers in Ukraine, and the Russian government still finds it impossible to publicly unmask the 9/11.
Yes.
You see?
You posted that video on your channel of Putin saying that those conspiracy theorists, they're
Yes.
wrong about 9/11. Yeah, it's
And also
great that you.
he also speaks about the moon. Okay,
Uh-huh.
but the
Yeah, it's
interesting
great.
thing, if you continue listen to Putin, at the very end, he says that if we go this way, they will also. I mean, we will come to the point that Gagarin, I mean, the first Russian man in the space, was not there either. Putin just said that in the same speech, the one you mentioned. Probably you did not watch it to that point, but he said that also. So that was like implication. But in reality, the story, of course, is not that. In reality, story is that Yuri Gagarin, who was the supposed first man in the space, was also part of the Freemasonic project on the Soviet side, because the cosmic, I mean, the space industry was controlled in the Soviet side by Freemasons also, as well as in NASA in America, and they also make a lot of fakes on the Russian side. And some of these fakes were not by the permission of the Soviet government. Means they just made the fakes, and then they made the Soviet government to face the consequences. So means when they did it, and that is after that they cannot do anything. For example, they declared that Gagarin was the first man in the space, and that was that was fake. But everybody believes that, at least in Soviet Union. And after that, the Russian leadership already understand that that was fake, but that was too late to change, okay? Because they were just already declared that. And then the Freemasons made Gagarin to escape to America. And once he escaped to America, the Soviet leadership has no choice than to claim that he died in the accident with the airplane. And they made a big story out of it, that he was killed with another pilot, and both of them were granted a state, like in Russia, the top figures that are the most important for the state, they have to be buried in a very special place in the Kremlin wall. And both of these men, they pretended that they bury them in the Kremlin wall, and they make the big story out of it. So, and in fact, Gagarin was in the hands of Americans already by that time. And of course, the American government can blackmail Russia, the Soviet government. So you see, we have your man with us, and he will probably publish the book how he flew to the space. Okay, and then what the Soviet government can do? Of course, they have to yield under the blackmail of the Americans. And as far as I know, they made the gentleman agreement, so that the Americans would hide Gagarin from the public view. They would not allow him to publish any books or anything like that. And the Soviet government would not mind the Americans to land to moon, and would not challenge that. So you remember that Gagarin escaped in 1968, just 1 year before American flew to the moon. American flew to the moon, I think, 69.
Well, 68 was Apollo 8, where they faked circling the moon.
Yeah, but Gagarin just escaped there just the year before they supposed to fly to the moon. And in my opinion, that is the only reason why the Soviet government did not challenge the American government.
Interesting. What about, let me ask you about Alexei Leonov, the first spacewalk in 1965. That to me looks fake.
Fake, of course.
Right.
And the first woman in the space is also fake.
Oh, interesting. This is opening up a whole new can of worms for us, and so there's a lot of questions I have about this. But before we go on to that, let me ask you a few questions about your background, because people are going to wonder.
Please let me make it clear. You have to understand that I'm not specialist in the space fakes. Okay, I just read a lot of things. I have some opinion, but I'm not a specialist, and I don't have the deep knowledge of this. So, but about the fact that Gagarin escaped to America, that I know for sure.
Interesting. That's very interesting.
Okay,
so let me go ahead.
But my specialty is different things. You know that I'm specialist in 9/11 particularly. That is my field of knowledge.
Yes, and that's actually what I have a lot of questions about today. So let me introduce you a little bit more about you. You were working for the 12th Chief Directorate under the Department of Defense.
That is
for
in
the
Soviet
Union.
time. Yes.
Yes.
I was a
and
service.
let me. Right. So this is a kind of a military intelligence where you're gathering information about.
No, the 12th Chief Directorate is not the military intelligence. That is the technical nuclear maintenance service that keeps the nuclear arsenal of the Soviet Union and Russia also.
Right.
So that is the organization responsible for the testing, safekeeping, technical maintenance, and so on of the nuclear weapons.
Right. But you also, part of your job was to keep track of the American things.
That is another thing, because within the 12th Chief Directorate, there was a smaller organization that called Special Control Service. It was like it was the part of it, but it was a little bit independent. And that one was organization responsible for detection of nuclear explosions. And that's where Exactly, I served.
Yes. So let me just ask some questions to make sure I have the story. You were working as the chief of shift from
Yes,
1987 to 1992.
yes,
All right. And and so you had, let me ask, you had just graduated. You went to the like a military university?
yes. Military school we call, but
Uh-huh.
it's like a by the grade is the same as university. You have to study 5 years, and the program is the same as in university. But they not call it university; they call it like military school.
Okay. And after military school, you did you go directly to the 12th chief director or you had to work your way up?
Yes, directly, because I was
Oh.
once I graduated from that military school, the next
Mhm.
they posted me was the 12th chief directorate.
And you weren't obviously posted as the chief of shift until later, right?
Yes, and once I arrived there, yes, then that was another story, and
Hmm.
I was appointed to that
Okay.
post.
All right. So now let me go on. We with the dissolution dissolving of the Soviet, so-called dissolving of the Soviet Union, and then in 1992 you quit. You gave up your job with them, right?
Yes, at the time of
And
the
it did
dissolution of the Soviet Union.
right. And so did you immediately go to Thailand then in 1992?
No, first I went to Malaysia and I stayed there for
Uh-huh.
about 5 years, and then I moved to
Okay,
Thailand.
but you left the country, right? In
Yes,
19 you had it with them.
yes,
All right, and then also just one other story is in case you know my listeners don't know you, is that in 2003 America attempted to do an extradition against you, to
yes,
extradite you to America.
yes.
And they trumped up some charges, basically gave some false charges like you had something to do with 9/11, which obviously you
Yes, they
didn't, but
claim that I was allegedly responsible for making fake passports for 9/11 hijackers.
right. So obviously the reason they made these fake charges is because they were threatened by something you were saying, right?
No, no, no. At that time, I did
No?
not say anything at all. They
Aha.
just want to make
Oh,
me scapegoat for because I was very convenient person because I was only one basically only one well-known man who used to serve in the 12th chief directorate, known
ah,
for organization responsible for the nuclear weapons, and the
okay.
Americans were looking for some scapegoat who sells the nuclear weapons for the so-called terrorists. And I was the best candidate for that, the most convenient person.
Okay. So let me ask another question.
Yeah.
So in the modern times, you have like a blog in the Russian language, and
Yes.
many people are familiar with you, right?
Yes.
So when did that start? When did you start doing this video blogging or
Okay.
blogging?
So my story is like this: that in 2000, between 2003 and 2004, I
Mhm.
did not do anything because I stay in the Thai prison because of that
Oh.
extradition attempt of the Americans. But in
Uh-huh.
2004, they abandoned the extradition attempt. And then I
Uh-huh.
was released from the prison. And then I decided that I have something to do about telling the truth. And
Uh-huh.
it took for me maybe another 2 years before I accumulated enough evidence. Because I could not say simply what I know because that would be not enough. I have to accumulate more evidence. So I
Right.
accumulated more evidence by searching some publicly available materials in the internet and in some libraries and some newspapers and so on. And by 2007, I thought that I assembled enough evidence,
Mm.
including the dictionaries, the ground zero definition, and so on, And I made my first book about 9/11 in English, about the nuclear demolition of the World Trade Center, particularly. And
Yes,
then, after that, a lot of people began to contact me, especially from America, some engineers, some architects who give me more and more and more and more details. So my knowledge grew from this point, and then I made the second edition of my book. That was in 2008. That became almost 3 times bigger than the first edition, because I learned of a lot of new details. And then in 2010, I decided to make a video with my explanation of how they use the nuclear weapons to demolish the Twin Towers. And in the same video, it was basically a video like introducing my second edition of my book, where I address more or less 90% of all questions related to 9/11, including the doomsday plane, what hit the Pentagon, how they shoot down the planes, and how they demolished the Twin Towers, how they demolished the Building 7, and why they demolished the Building 7. And a lot of related things. And this video was like 4.5 hours in English. It was like an interview with me. And then I decided to publish that on YouTube, because the originally this video was supposed to be posted somewhere in England, not in YouTube, but in some serious website. But after that, I wait for maybe a year, and I see that it would never be published. Probably that person who undertook this project, and the one who was interviewing me, I think he was threatened by somebody in England, and I understood that they will never publish this video. So I decided to publish it by myself, and I published that on my YouTube channel.
And some parts were taken down.
Yes, no, and it was not like this. The first time when I published it on YouTube, it was a big hit. It's just like I don't know. It was very successful, because YouTube was not at that time. It was 2010, and YouTube was not as
what it is today.
Not as today. Yeah, they don't have the censorship like today. And you can publish basically everything, including any kind of conspiracy theories, any kind of critics, whatever, except maybe pornography or something like that. So once I published that, it was a big interest, and despite my YouTube channel was not popular, it has less than 1,000 subscribers, I believe, that time. This video was so successful that in a few days it accumulated over 100,000 views. And the rate of acquiring the views was so high that it was clear that in 2 more days it will reach over 1 million. It was that way. So and that time YouTube just prohibited that videos. They were banned. So but because they were banned, and it never happened with any conspiracy theories in regard to 9/11, a lot of people begin to understand that this is not a joke, and that is the very truth. And they begin to publish my videos elsewhere in some like private YouTube channels where the YouTube did not see them. I mean, when the YouTube censorship did not see them, and Vimeo and Dailymotion and some other channels like that, and in some forums discussing 9/11, and this and also somebody begin to make DVDs with my video and distribute them, and that is how I became popular. And that I'm talking only in English. In Russian, I didn't have any channel since then. And after that, in maybe 2014, I think. But in Russian, I had an article. A short article describing that in Russian language, how they use the nuclear charges to demolish the Twin Towers, and about the planes also. And that Russian article was quite popular in Russia also. I think over 1 million people read that. And finally, I was contacted by the people who begin to ask me to open the Russian channel. But I was reluctant and I didn't open it for quite a long time. But eventually I decided like in 2021 to open it. So finally I decided to open the Russian channel in 2021 and it became very successful. Since then I published the over 150 videos, not only about 9/11. About 9/11 maybe only 15% of them, mostly on dealing with the modern politics, with interpretation of Bible, interpretation of Quran, some religious matters, philosophy, and things like that, and it is quite successful in Russia. But in the same time, it is prohibited. So like. In Russia, there is a prohibition to deal with me and to mention my name in any public source that has more than 100,000 subscribers. So, like, let's say that if any Russian has the YouTube channel or any other channel and has more than 100,000 subscribers, he will be visited by like FSB, the Secret Service of Russia, and they will be explained that they cannot deal with me, they cannot invite me, and they cannot even mention my name.
Wow.
And in fact, the same prohibition exists in English mass media since 2007, since I published the first edition of my book. There was a circular prohibition, not only in English, I think in all European languages, including German, Spanish, French, Italian, and so on. So that any big website or YouTube channel with the big number of subscribers or any official newspaper can mention my name. So I'm like an person speaking in oral terms.
Yes. Okay, so let me. I have a lot of questions about the Soviet nuclear program, which I think you might be able to answer. But before we get to that, is there anything else you want to add about the so-called space race?
Yes, I told you that I'm not a big specialist in the space race. I'm more specialist in nuclear demolition of the World Trade Center and things related to 9/11. And also, I'm more or less, I think I have good understanding of political structure of the modern state, of the modern society, of the United Nations, and this kind of thing. But when it comes to the space, I have quite, I would say, superficial knowledge. But some things, like, for example, the fact that Gagarin never flew to the space and that he escaped to America, this I know for sure. But that is not, I mean, I'm not professional in that. I'm not an expert in that. Okay. I can only express my opinion, not more than that.
Right. So let me ask you another question. Now, there are some Freemason YouTube pages, and I was doing some research about Freemasonry during the Soviet Union time. And the official story, which the Freemasons tell, is that Freemasonry was banned during the Soviet Union. There weren't Freemasons involved in the Soviet Union. So can you comment anything on that?
Yes, originally the Freemasonry was banned in Soviet Union because because after the Russian the Bolshevik Revolution, I mean, the revolution was anti-Freemasonic. So, because the main objective of the Freemasons, you know, what is the main point of Bible, of the Holy Scripture? The main point is that the Lord God took people out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, and told them that they are prohibited from coming back to the slave-owning Egypt. So they must live in the promised land according to the God's law. That's it. And that is the main point of the whole Bible and the Holy Quran in addition. So the Freemasons, because they are Satanists, they rebel against God, and their intention is to bring all former slaves of God back to the Egypt, back to the land of slavery. That's exactly why in the $1 bill, they have the Great Seal of the United States that depicts the pyramid with the eyes of Satan. You remember that one? So that is the Freemasonic symbolism, and the communists, in fact, they were against that. So they said that we will destroy the state, and we will create a promised land where the people would live according to the God's law as it in the ancient Israel. So, and they wanted to more or less to create something similar to the southern states of America before the Civil War, something of this kind. So, where the people would live according to the law of Moses only, and not under the state of oppression. So the main I forgot the English name. The main slogan of the communists that time after the Russian Revolution was that we are not slaves and slaves are not we. Okay, yes. Now they abandoned that, but before they used to teach children grammar in the school by the first words that the children have to write in the school when learning the grammar is we are not slaves, like this. So of course the communists were against the Freemasons. Of course the Freemasons were persecuted and mostly destroyed by the earlier Bolshevik secret services. And it was so until I believe 1935, because in 1935 the Bolsheviks changed. They, instead of building the promised communism, they begin to build the state. Before, the reason of the communists was like this. They say, we are against state, we are against police, and we have to abandon the state. But we have to keep state for a while, because the people that we inherited from the Tsarist regime was not free-minded enough. We have to bring up at least 2 generations of the new people. I mean, the sons and the grandsons of the former slaves, to bring them up as a free man, and then we will abandon the state. That was the process.
This was a kind of a revisionism done by Stalin.
Yes, it looks like, because the original communist idea is to abandon the state. They are more or less like anarchists, actually. But the anarchists, they want to abandon the state immediately. But the communists, they believe that it is not possible to abandon state immediately. They can abandon it approximately after the 40 years. At the same time that former Egyptian slaves under the leadership of Moses had to wander in the desert. You remember the biblical story. So that 40 years was approximately the same time that the communists promised to abandon the state in 40 years' time. So if the Russian Revolution was in 1917, they had to abandon the state more or less by the time of 1950, more or less 40 years. So, but in reality, the course of the Communist Party development, the policy, was not that. Instead of bringing up free-minded children, the slaves of God, the free men who would live in the stateless society, they begin to bring them up more or less like obedient slaves of the state. And I don't know how they managed to do that because I did not live that time, but it looks like so. By 1935, Stalin decided to abandon a lot of the communist principle and to sacrifice them to the stronger state.
Yes.
And at that time, I believe that it was the first contact with the Freemasons because Stalin badly needed technologies from the West. And the West ignored communist Russia. And by 1935, somehow, Stalin began to receive some technologies from United States, and it allowed him to make the industrialization of the Soviet Union and so on.
Right.
I believe that was done by his contact with the Freemasons and by some.
Yes. Weren't they called the six? I think they were called the 6-year plans. The first 6-year, 5-year plans, right? Sorry. Yeah. So he started getting a lot.
Okay. So, but still, officially, Freemasons were prohibited in Soviet Union.
Uh-huh.
So
and also, let me.
But that is not yet. That is not finished yet. And then the second time, when Hitler attacked Soviet Union in 1941, and the Soviet Union was in a very bad situation, Stalin had to make a stronger deal with the Freemasons, because the Freemasons promised to arrange the land lease from America and from England, and also they promised some intelligence information. And on the same time, Freemasons also needed Soviet support, because the Freemasons were against Hitler, and the Soviet Union was an open enemy of Hitler. So I mean, that was mutual interest. Stalin needs Freemasons to help him, and Freemasons needed Stalin to help them. That's why they get into the second deal. As a result, Soviet Union, with Freemasonic help, managed to defeat Hitler. But you know that you can't actually deal with the Freemasons because they will eventually kill you for sure. So that's what exactly happened with Stalin. He was poisoned by the Freemasons eventually. And once he was poisoned, the Freemasons quickly get rid of the real communists in his environment, and they kept only their own agents. So since then, the Freemasons were still officially prohibited in the Soviet Union, but in fact, the Freemasonic agents were in the whole leadership of the Communist Party. So between Stalin's death and 1991, officially the Soviet Union belonged to the Communist Party, not to the Freemasons. But because the Freemasons were the Freemasonic agents were the Freemasonic agents penetrated the leadership of the Communist Party, that so-called Politburo, and they also penetrated the leadership of the KGB, because all the leadership of the KGB was also the Freemasons, the Freemasonic agents. In fact, the Freemasons ran Soviet Union from behind the curtain from at least 1953 until 1991. And in 1991, eventually, they just replaced the communists behind the curtains, and now Russia belongs to the Freemasons completely and officially, and they are no longer prohibited, by the way.
Let me start from a little bit earlier, and perhaps you can correct my Russian on this. Operation Osoaviakim. This was 2,500 German scientists were transferred to the Soviet Union after the war. Nuclear. So yeah, this was, and then let me jump ahead to the first Soviet nuclear reactor test facility in 1947, and they say that it was basically a copy of the Hanford reactor in America.
I can't answer your question because I'm not a nuclear scientist and it's not my field of knowledge, but it could be.
Okay, what about now? Let me. I'm just going through a list of important dates here. See if you have any comments. There was one researcher who exposed the fact that in 1948, the U.S. was transferring B-24 and B-25 bombers to the Soviet Union, basically in preparation for the Korean War.
This I cannot say anything. I don't.
Okay. Anyway, that's fine. Well then, so then coming back to this whole spy thing, in the 1950, America arrested some Soviet spies. Anything you want to say about that? I mean, were they really desperate in need, or was it all just like a puppet show?
It's very hard to say, but I think there was some contradictions between former cooperation between Stalin's secret services and Freemasons. On the one hand, on the other hand, that the Freemasons needed to make a new enemy, because you know that the Freemasons cannot live without the world enemy. They always need one. So
Right.
at the time of the Second World War, they had Hitler and the Japanese also as the enemies. But since they were defeated, they could not live anymore without the enemy. So they needed to create a new enemy. That's why they decided to start the so-called Cold War between between the United States and the supposedly communist Soviet Union. And at that time, you are asking, there probably was a contradiction between the former friendship and the new need to start the Cold War. And I believe
Yes.
that that was conditioned by that fact.
Yes, that's what exactly my conclusion was. So let me see if there's any other questions here. So the U.S. Let's see, the first Soviet nuclear bomb was called First Lightning, and they say it was very similar to the U.S. bomb known as the Fat Man. Any comments on that?
Probably yes.
Okay, the U.S. Let's see, the U.S. built their first nuclear power station in 1951, and the Soviets built their first nuclear power station in 1954. Again, that's probably not your area of specialty. So let me. My question was, in the most Americans, we trust in Wiki. I'm not saying me, but most Americans trust in Wikipedia, and Wikipedia says that the Soviet Union did 7 of these high altitude nuclear tests.
Yeah,
Is that true, or do you?
Probably
Okay.
yes. I don't see. I did not see a reason to not to trust Wikipedia. In some
subject,
aspects, of course, you have to question what they publish, but when they just say simple things that are well known, why not to trust them?
Okay. So let's let me see. I'm trying to come now a little bit towards the space program. Luna 2 was the first craft to ever crash into the moon, and they supposedly beat the Americans by 3 years. America didn't crash into the moon until 3 years later. And Luna 3 was the first craft to actually take images of the moon. And that was so what do you think, coming back to the Freemasonic New World Order? There was obviously some technology sharing here in this Luna program.
There's no doubt, because you can see that the Russian Soviet space program was controlled by the same kind of people as the American NASA. and they used that to blackmail Soviet government because they could really have good lever to blackmail the US, the Soviet government when they I don't know how to explain. Okay, you see, the Freemasons, they always need some strong thing to blackmail the government. US government or Russian government or Soviet government or Chinese government, doesn't matter, but they need it. So when the Freemasons falsified the space flight of Gagarin, they had a good point to blackmail Soviet government. And when Gagarin escaped to America, they have even stronger point to continue to blackmail Soviet government. And the same thing is when it comes to America. When they arranged the Americans to supposedly land to moon, that is not the American government who need that. American government doesn't need that. It's the Freemasons who need that because after that they can blackmail American government, and it's very convenient for them. So the Freemasons, they always do things like this. So they hijacked the Soviet space program and they hijacked the American space program. They hijacked the American missile program and they hijacked the Russian, the Soviet missile program. They hijacked the American nuclear program and they hijacked the Soviet nuclear program. And of course, because they are the same people, they could share some technologies and some secrets and so on. I think that is easy to understand.
Let me ask your opinion about and also correct my Russian pronunciation. Brezhnev Kosygin.
Yeah, it's okay, understandable.
They made a deal with LBJ, Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon B. Johnson was a Freemason. He was a publicly admitted Freemason. Means he was proud of his Masonic membership. And by the year 1964, 1965, they had already created the hotline, so LBJ could just call up Brezhnev and Kosygin, and So what do you think about these two, Brezhnev and Kosygin? Were they part of the Freemasonic New World Order?
Very hard to say, but I think so, because they were the top figures in the political structure of the Soviet Union. Brezhnev was the Secretary General of the Communist Party, and Kosygin was the Prime Minister, the chief of the Soviet of Ministers, and of course they must be. But it doesn't mean that they must be members of the Freemasonic sect or anything. Not necessary. They could be controlled by some other way.
Yes, I'm wondering because, like for example, if you ever go to England, there's another organization which is very similar to Freemasonry, which is called the Lucius Trust. I don't know. I guess the name means trust in Lucifer. But anyway, they have regular meetings in England. And I'm wondering if there's some similar organizations like Freemasonry in the Soviet Union at that time.
As I told you, that because the Communist Party of Soviet Union, even after Stalin's death and after the denunciation of him on the 20th Congress of the Communist Party, officially continued to follow the revolutionary ideas. They cannot accept the Freemasons because the Freemasons, they were official enemies of the Bolsheviks from the beginning. So officially the Freemasons were prohibited in Soviet Union until 1991. And the special department of the KGB, because in KGB there was a special department that called the 5th Chief Directorate of KGB, number 5. That was responsible for the protecting of the so-called constitutional order of the Soviet Union. That more or less, that is like organization that has to deal with any threat, internal threat of the traitors and people who attempt to overthrow the constitutional order, any kind of destructive religious sects and so on. And of course, officially, Freemasons were enemies because they are a secret society officially. They must be the enemies of the state, not only the Soviet state, just any state. And of course, the fifth chief directorate of the KGB must even have a special big department that was officially tasked with suppressing the Freemasonic activity in Soviet Union. But that is the only formality, because in reality, the very chief of the fifth chief directorate of KGB General Philip Bobkov, was a Freemason. So means how the Freemasons can fight with the Freemasons is just not possible. And the chief of the, you see that in KGB there were at the time of you mentioned Brezhnev and Kosygin, at their time, the chief of the KGB, the chairman. So the chairman of the KGB, that was leader of the KGB. So the chairman of KGB at the time of Brezhnev was Andropov, and Andropov was a Freemason, no doubt. That is for sure Freemason. And the most important department of KGB is the fifth chief directorate, the directorate that is responsible of safekeeping of the constitutional order. And the chief of this chief directorate, the General KGB Bobkov, was another Freemason. So it means the two most important persons in KGB were both Freemasons. And not only them, there were many more Freemasons.
Interesting.
But at least these two very important ones. So of course, officially Freemasons in the Soviet Union were prohibited, but in the same time, they were the one who ran the Soviet Union and its secret services.
Yes. I'm really grateful to you for mentioning this. Is a lot of new information for me, and I'm going to have to do a lot of research to get ready for our next, this is going to give me a lot more questions.
Okay, you're welcome.
Let me come back to the 1965, because for me personally, I feel this is a very important date because, well, there's three major events that happened. Number one is that the America, LBJ, started sending the troops into Vietnam, and the Soviets were supplying weapons to the North Vietnamese, and the Americans were helping the South Vietnamese. So this was the first thing, the war escalating. And then the second thing was the Alexei Leonov faked the first spacewalk, in the same year, 1965. And then the third important thing was America started decreasing their nuclear stockpile and helping the Soviets to increase their nuclear stockpile. These are three very important changes of events that happened in 1965. Do you have any comments on what might have gone on there?
First I want to correct you about Vietnam, because many people think that the Soviet Union was officially involved in the Vietnamese affairs from the beginning. It was not true. In reality, the Soviet Union has to be clearly separated into two periods. Before the 20th Congress of the Communist Party, that happened after Stalin's death, and after the 20th Congress of the Communist Party. So, in the 20th Congress of the Communist Party, it was declared that the communists are atheists. They declared that God does not exist, that the hell and paradise do not exist, that the world to come does not exist, and the supreme judgment does not exist. Okay? Before that, the communists were believers in God, and after that, they were not. And that is very important, because without understanding that, you cannot understand the rest of development.
Interesting.
So
this was
when we come to
50...
the North Vietnam, that was 1956.
Okay. Right.
So when it comes to North Vietnam, you have to understand that the North Vietnamese communists, they were real communists in the beginning, not like the Soviet after 1956. They were more or less like the Soviet after 1917. I mean, they were just sincere communists who wanted to go to paradise.
Yeah.
Okay? So they were more, I mean, you can compare them with Islamic fundamentalists. They did not afraid to die on the battlefield, because they believe that if they are killed in the battlefield, they will just go to paradise directly. That is that type of the communist.
So that's why.
You can't compare them with the modern communists who do not believe in God.
Right.
So at that time, the war between the South and North Vietnam started. The Soviet Union and China were enemies already.
Right.
Because the Chinese considered the Soviet as a revisionist who betrayed the communist idea, who betrayed the ideals of the revolution.
Right.
And the North Vietnamese communists were originally supported by Chinese, not by the Soviet. So they had the ideology similar to the Chinese, not similar to the Soviet. I mean, they were original communists.
Interesting. So, okay, go ahead.
Now, in around 1968, I believe, or 69, in the leadership of the Vietnamese Communist Party, there was a coup d'etat, or something like a revisionist attempt, the Freemasonic coup d'etat, let's say, like this, similar to the 20th Congress of the Communist Party in the Soviet Union. So as a result, the North Vietnamese Communist Party since 1969 began to be pro-Soviet, but not before 1969, only after that. And in the same time, the underground Communist Party of the Southern Vietnam, that was called the Viet Cong, was still pro-Chinese. So the fact that the Freemasons managed to make the revisionist change in the leadership of the North Vietnamese Communist Party in 1968 did not affect the South Vietnamese Communist Party that was underground, because that one was still original one and still under the Chinese control. So that's why the Vietnamese affair is just a bit not easy to understand. But you also have to understand that the Americans, once they understood that the leadership of it's not exactly Americans, the Freemasons who stand behind them. Once Freemasons understood that the communists in North Vietnam are no longer dangerous, because they begin to be pro-Soviet since 1969. And it would be a good idea if the North Vietnamese will defeat the South Vietnamese and made the whole Communist Party of Vietnam pro-Soviet and not pro-Chinese. They in fact allowed the North Vietnamese to slowly have advantage and finally occupy South Vietnam. That's why Americans actually withdrew from Vietnam in 1973, as you remember.
Right.
Because they no longer need to be there, because they already achieved the Freemasonic objective by making the North Vietnamese Communist Party revisionist, not the really revolutionary one. So that's when you analyze the Vietnamese affair, you also have to understand some details about it. It's not
interesting.
It's not
very helpful
as look like.
Right. And this is also 1969 was the same year that Nixon comes to power. And Nixon was a secret Freemason. I did some research. According to the public, he pretended to to not be a Freemason. But I found some documents where he actually participated in some Freemasonic rituals. So they're like that. Back then in the 60s, 70s, many Freemasons were quite secret about their membership, you know.
But I believe they are still
But
secret because it's a secret organization.
yeah, well, I mean, some of them nowadays, you know, like, I mean, for example, like President LBJ, he was proud of his Freemasonic membership, and there was 12 NASA employees who were proud enough, you know, like Buzz Aldrin wearing his Freemasonic ring. You know, he's not trying to hide anything, but many of them were, most of them were very secret about it, and you know, the fact that Nixon comes in, being a secret Freemason, and then the whole North Vietnam was changing over. Then Nixon might have started this shifting towards the North Vietnamese, as you said. Okay, well that's very, very helpful. In fact, it gives me a whole new perspective and so many things to research, and it's very, very inspiring to talk to you because you know a lot of things, you know, which I wouldn't, you know, have known about the Soviet Union. It's very, very helpful, the things you have told me today. Do you have any other things to add? Because
I
for
don't know.
me
It
now,
depends on the question. If you have any question, I will try to answer. But we can
yes,
do it later because I think how long we are talking already? We are talking already 1
1
hour.
hour, yeah.
Yeah, we can do it in the other video.
Yes, I think you have given me enough that I need to go do some of my own research and follow up on some of the things you
Okay.
have taught us today. So I'm very grateful for you today for appearing here, and we're going to try to have you back on again sometime. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, yeah. But using this opportunity, I just because we discussed my research on 9/11, I just want to remind everyone that I had videos on nuclear demolition of the World Trade Center, of how Americans shot down their passenger planes and many other aspects of 9/11. And all these videos I remade recently last year, and now there are new versions of them. And because they are completely prohibited on YouTube, and they also prohibited on Vimeo, Facebook, and Dailymotion, on these platforms, but still they are available in platforms such as Bastion, Odyssey, Rumble, and BitChute. So I invite everyone to visit my website, and the website you can see in here, in this one, this website, 911thology.com.
Right. Okay, this is your webpage?
Yeah, and in there you can find all links to those videos on 9/11, and I invite everybody to watch them.